It doesn't matter what your position is. If you see something that needs to be fixed, if you see a deficit, if you see something that could be improved, never be afraid to raise your hand and say, I have an idea.
Welcome back to Promoted with Denise Harris, the podcast where we dive deep into the strategies, stories, and skills that help ambitious women rise in their career and get promoted. I'm Denise Harris, your host. Today on Promoted, I'm thrilled to welcome a powerhouse to the world of talent management and public relations, Gilda Squire. Gilda is the founder of Squire Media Management, a boutique firm that she launched in 2008 that's behind the brilliant branding and media presence of iconic figures like Wendell Pierce, Courtney B. Vance, Honorary Oscar recipient Angela Bassett, and ballerina Misty Copeland. Most recently, she added Crain Jean-Pierre, former White House press secretary, to her impressive client roster. With a background that spans brand marketing at Goldman Sachs, high-profile publicity at HarperCollins, and now a leadership role shaping culture through media, Gilda is the ultimate strategist behind the spotlight. Her story is a masterclass in vision, influence, and the art of branding, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Let's get into it. Welcome, Gilda. I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Denise, for having me on Promoted. You know, when you hear someone else read your bio or talk about what you've done, it's always one of those things where it's like, whoa, is that really me? So thank you for that introduction.
Well, it really is you, and it's my pleasure. So, Gilda, you launched Squire Media Management in 2008, stepping into the world of public relations, talent management, and brand marketing, and of course, media training. So, what inspired you to start your own firm? And what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced in the early days?
So I'll be honest, it was my own personal branding dilemma. I would call it that. I had been in publishing at that point in major publishing houses, Penguin Putnam at the time, Penguin Random House, and then HarperCollins. And I'd done that for several years. And I started to hear people describe me as, well, you know, Gilda, the literary publicist, or Gilda, the book publicist. And that's fine. But I found myself wanting to go broader in terms of who I represented and what kinds of brands and products and initiatives I represented. So it really was my desire to not be just known as a literary or book publicist, but to expand beyond that, not leaving books and authors behind, because I still work with books and authors, but I wanted to expand it into working with other types of performing artists and organizations. And so that's where it came from. And I launched my business, ironically, I made the decision in 2007, like late 2007, to do this in 2008. It was my 2008 Happy New Year's gift to myself to launch.
Wow.
And I did that, if you will recall, in the midst of going into a massive financial crisis in this country, in the world. And I figured, if I can do this now, if I can successfully launch and build this business now, then maybe I have a shot at this. I would say the biggest challenges was convincing myself that I could be an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is a really sexy word that a lot of people like to use, but it's real, you know, because you become you. I would check with full benefits type of person. That's all I knew. And
Right.
So to go from that to then having to be everything all at once. I had to be the accountant. I had to be the computer tech pro. I had to be the assistant. I had to be everything. And so convincing myself that not only could I walk away and do it well from a full-time job with full-time benefits to being my own boss was a lot for me. But, you know, we're sure I was able to do it, and I stayed with it.
Yeah. Well, and not only were you able to do it, you've been extraordinarily successful at doing it.
You know, going back to the personal branding, to be honest, I have always understood the importance of being consistent, being present, being reliable, and presenting as credible. And so those have been the four key ingredients for me. And that's what I recommend to others as they think about their own personal brand. And so when you operate in that way, I personally feel, and I know it's happened for me, I feel I'm a supreme example of that, where the opportunities, the doors are open. People feel like you show up in a way that is credible and reliable and consistent. People will want to work with you. And so that's how I treated my job and my career in publishing, and even on Wall Street previous to that, and even, working for the federal government previous to that. And so when I opened up my doors for my own firm, my first client was my job, my old job, HarperCollins Publishers. They gave me 3 books to work on. That was my very first client.
Wow.
And I
That's a
walked
great
out,
story.
I walked out the door with that.
Yeah, that's a great story. And look at where it's led you. And also look at all the doors that have opened for you or that you've pushed open.
A combination of both, right? So when I left my company, HarperCollins, one of the things that I did was I started planting those seeds months before that I was thinking about doing this with agents, with editors, with other authors who I'd worked with. And ironically, what allowed me to expand was working with Mickey Taylor, who used to be the cover editor, beauty director of Essence magazine.
Yes, I remember.
And she was also in the midst of her personal branding expansion of her brand footprint, moving into television, not just in print magazines. And so she had an opportunity with TV1. They were doing a lifestyle block on the weekends. And so she was going to get her own show. And so she came to me because I'd worked with her on her book. And she said, would you, now that you're on your own, doing your own business, would you consider working with me as I launched this TV show with TV1? And so that was my entry into working in television. And I ended up working with TV1 as a client for about 3 years from that.
Yeah. It's interesting because it sounds like you have this innate ability to grow where you're planted,
Absolutely.
right? And to create from that foundation.
I believe in that very much so, Denise, because I feel like if the opportunity wasn't yours, you wouldn't be placed in that position to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, but it doesn't just come and you just take it and you sort of rest on your laurels. Well, I have it now, so I don't really have to put in the work. You have to put in the work. So just because you're placed there, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen on its own.
Right.
You've as much work as you put in to get there in order to stay there, if not more work. Mm-hmm. And so that's the way I see it. I think about, when I first started working with ballerina Misty Copeland, and that was not a world that I knew anything about. I think I'd been to maybe 3 ballet performances in my whole life, and it was largely with Dance Theater of Harlem. People don't realize, people interchange Dance Theater of Harlem with Alvin Ailey. They're not one and the same. Alvin Ailey is more contemporary modern. Dance Theater of Harlem is ballet. So, it's things like that that I didn't even realize, right? And so when I started working with her in 2011, it was not just, let me just get her some media. It was, let me really understand the world of ballet and why what we're talking about with her is so significant. So that's part of it. It's doing the work. You get the opportunity, you do the work to get the opportunity, but then you have to use the power of your personal brand, every element in the toolbox to make sure that you're successful in what you're doing.
That's actually a great segue. I'm curious, let's talk a bit now about branding. Why is having a personal brand important for someone? And what are maybe 2 or 3 elements of a powerful brand?
Okay. The word brand gets bandied about as a buzzword. And for me, branding is an action. It's not just a thing, it's an action. And it's something that you really have to nurture and put your time, energy, and resources into growing and evolving. Why it's important is our personal brand is how we show up in the world. It is how people view us. It is how we navigate the world. It's how that we engage with the world and how the world engages with us. Having a real clear understanding and appreciation for your personal brand, that really can dictate what your career possibilities are. And not just what the possibilities are, but to the extent of which you will grow in that career. And so that's why it's important. How do you show up? And the keys I mentioned are presentation, credibility, liability, and consistency. How do you show up? Are you viewed as credible? Are you consistent? Are you reliable? Can people rely upon you? If this is how you show up and this is how you got the job, can we rely on you to be consistent in what you bring forward?
Yeah. I often feel like brand is like what people say about you when you're not in the room. Would that be true to some extent or not so much?
You know, yes.
The way people think about you, right? I mean, if you say, hey,
I was thinking about that this morning, actually, and thinking about, I'm just going to use the ultimate brand, Beyonce.
yes,
Beyonce is one of those ubiquitous brands. She seems like she's everywhere all the time. She's on social media, she's in the media, she's, on Billboard, she's performing, she's everywhere, right? But when you think about Beyonce, it's really genius. And I have to give credit to Yvette Noel-Scher, her publicist. She's a big part of this. I mean, the fact that I can say that I know Yvette is an honor for me because I think she's incredible. But what's really genius about Beyonce is when you really think about it, yeah, she does seem to be everywhere all the time, but it's not always her. Right? Beyonce shows up when she has a product in the market, when she's launching her Sacred Hair Care. She shows up when she's got a new album. She's the one who controls that narrative when it first comes up. She is out there on tour, right? She has her awards, but when those things are not happening, right? She goes away.
Yeah.
She's not the one continuing the conversation. We are. If she doesn't have an album that she's promoting, you're not seeing her in the press.
Right.
If she doesn't have a tour that she's promoting, you're not seeing her in the press. You're not seeing her on the scene. If she's not presenting a special award or nominated for an award, she's not on that red carpet. She's not even in the building. If she's at a film premiere, 9 times out of 10, she's either in it or she has something to do with it. She's not just showing up on every red carpet. So when the reason why she feels like she's here all the time is largely because those of us who are supporters and fans of our brand are keeping the conversation going long after she's moved on and, to the next thing.
No, I think that's absolutely true. But the other thing is that you're also an expert in messaging and storytelling, right? And so when you think about professionals using sort of a strategic storytelling, to position themselves for promotion or for career pivots, that matters. So yes, Beyonce, everything you said is absolutely true. That's why we don't even have to say her last name. But how does someone who is just sort of the regular everyday person, like how do they stand out in such a competitive and crowded arena?
So before Misty became Misty, the more global sense, I'm going to use her as an example because when I first started working with her in 2011, and I know I'm talking about Misty a lot, but she really is one of those stories that she was in what they would consider a very niche kind of environment, which is classical ballet, a very niche, very specific environment. And when I first started working with her, one of the challenges was thinking about how in this crowded pop cultural environment, how do I take someone who is in this more niche world of ballet that does not seem at all relatable or accessible? How do I take someone like her and make her and her story relatable? How do we take this ballerina and get people to be interested? And it was hard. It was hard. The media wasn't interested at all. people, even friends of mine, when I talked to them about Misty, I said, is their story incredible? And they just kind of, all they heard was ballet. Well, I don't really have any interest in ballet.
Yeah.
And so one of the first things that we did was, in addition to pursuing media that wasn't interested at that time, was partnering with the Boys and Girls Club. She actually took her first ballet lesson on the basketball court of her local Boys and Girls Club. I heard her say that in an interview, because that was not in her American Ballet Theater bio. But I heard her, and this is going to the storytelling part of it. I heard her say that in an interview. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting story, right? How many classical ballerinas with a company like an American Ballet Theater would have taken their first ballet class at a basketball court of a Boys and Girls Club at a community center? And so I partnered her with the Boys and Girls Club. And she started going and talking to Boys and Girls Clubs locally. It wasn't a big national thing. It didn't get a ton of publicity, but it did get publicity in those local markets, right? And that then bubbled up to the National Boys and Girls Club headquarters, who thought, oh, wow, we have this incredible person who's doing this amazing, extraordinary thing. We want to work with her. So that was one of the avenues that we pursued to start to expose Misty to different audiences. And so for people who are, you're in a job and you're trying to think about, how can I use my personal brand to grow? Look for those opportunities that may not seem so sexy or so big, but they could bubble up to be something more sexy, more substantial, more significant, more big.
That sounds like you're saying take risks.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. I mean, that's what that was. I mean, because there was no way you could have known that it would have been a successful initiative or effort for Misty to work with the Boys and Girls Club, right? I mean, so you took a risk and she took a risk. And I imagine that that's really a lot of the work that you do is just kind of trusting your instincts, which is what we have to do as well.
It's very much trusting your instincts. All of it is a risk. When you go into working with someone, I mean, even on the public relations side of what I do, I don't control any of this. I don't control what's happening in the news on a day-to-day basis, because a lot of what I do really does stem from what is happening in the news. There have been times when I've booked a client on a Today Show or CBS Mornings, and if breaking news happens, guess what? That client segment goes by the wayside. So then what do? Then you have to pivot and you think about, okay, well, where else can we go that will be just as significant, just as impactful, and reach the audiences we're trying to reach? So it's all, from my standpoint, from my perspective, it's all a risk. And so, yeah, the work that I did with Misty, it was very risky, particularly because, again, I didn't know anything about the ballet world. I had to understand why her story was so significant within the context of the ballet world. So going back to the rest of us who are not, entertainers, or you have to think about, how do you carve out a space in a crowded environment? What makes your story, what you bring to the table, unique, special, significant, important, valuable?
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, Gilda, is that sometimes an idea doesn't work initially. And you have to be okay with just kind of putting that behind you and trying something else, right? Because a lot of it is trial and error and just really learning about what's going to help you stand out. Right. I mean, getting to understand your industry and networking and talking to people and, doing things that may not necessarily be so comfortable, but being able to put yourself out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think about when I first started working with Angela Bassett in 2018, her show, which is now going into its 9th season in the fall. We're currently in the 8th season, 911. 911 had just come on the air. I think it was January 2018. And then Black Panther, the first Black Panther came out, I believe it was February 2018. I started working with her in February 2018. And while Angela was incredibly successful, we as people of color knew and loved her. thankfully, NAACP Image Awards, they recognized her with awards, and we all know the story of What's Love Got to Do with the Oscar loss.
Sure.
She did win a Golden Globe. Beyond that, what I found interesting about Angela is that as successful as she had been for many years, I didn't feel like she had her own strong brand and profile. A lot of even with Black Panther, a lot of the coverage was Angela within the cast, as opposed to Angela having her own space. And that's where it comes in handy when you hire someone who's a publicist or even a branding specialist. They start to think about, how do we give you your own space? And so that's one of the first things that I started to work on with her, is making sure that we got profiles on her. It's not that people didn't know about her.
Right, right.
Carving out a space for her, and in the way that a Meryl Streep, in a way that a Viola Davis, and all of these other women have their own space. Even if they're within cast, they still have their own space. So that's something that I started to work on with her. And one of the things that I also started to realize was, as accomplished as she is, she didn't have many awards from her industry. Mm. And so that was that. So number one was carving out a space from a public relations standpoint for her to be highlighted in spotlight, but also making sure that from a legacy standpoint, at this point, a legacy standpoint was established for her within her industry. And so I would say that the Black Girls Rock Awards in 2019 was the first time in a long time, outside of the NAACP Image Awards, that Angela had been recognized in terms of her legacy, in terms of her body of work. And so that was the beginning of me making sure that she was put in those spaces to be recognized for her work. So, long story short, we ended up with an honorary Oscar.
Yeah. And congratulations on that. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. And I'm sure she's delighted about it, as you are too. But the thing that I think about is, what can we do as professionals? What can we learn as professionals from the world of celebrity? And maybe it's not as complicated or as hard as one may think, right? Because there are those opportunities for us to carve out our spaces, whether it's being on a panel, whether it's understanding how to become a speaker and telling your story, right? Whether it's connecting with other women through boards or other opportunities, just being visible. I mean, I think those are all components of it. But what am I missing, if anything? Are there some things that we can learn from the world of celebrity in terms of putting our own selves out there?
Really covered it. You really covered the scope of it. Being unafraid to tell your story, being unafraid to stand up and talk about what you've accomplished. And, I'm actually guilty of that myself. Because, as a publicist and even as a manager, my focus is always on the client and pushing them forward, making sure that they're carving out their space. And oftentimes, I have neglected doing that for myself as a business person, because I have a personal brand too. And so being here with you today is part of me being on that journey. Oftentimes people will say to me, "Oh, Gilda, people don't really know all that you've done, all that you've accomplished." Now, I feel like the work speaks for itself, but not always. Not always. You have to speak for the work.
Yeah.
You have to be speaking up for the work. And it's not, and being comfortable with that. It's not bragging. It really is telling the story of how you navigate the world.
Yeah. And I think that people have to look at it that way. Right. I make a really great point in terms of, it isn't boasting, it's not braggadocious, but it really is about storytelling. It's really about seizing the opportunity to have conversation about what you're doing. I think another piece of it too is, surrounding yourself with people who have similar interests, people who you can learn from, people who can learn from you as well. It's not done in a bubble.
And it doesn't have to, everybody thinks that it has to be this big national platform that they step out on. Doesn't have to be that in the beginning, right? You can join the local chapter of XYZ organization.
Yes.
As long as that organization is aligned with your interests and your where you're looking to go, your personal goals, your professional goals, join that organization. Become integrated in its programming and whatever initiatives they're launching. Be not afraid of jumping in and saying, I have an idea. I have an idea. You know, one of the things that I learned working at Goldman Sachs was it doesn't matter what your position is. If you see something that needs to be fixed, if you see a deficit, if you see something that can be improved, don't be afraid to speak up. Even if you're working in our mailroom, that literally was said to me. Even if someone is working in our mailroom, we see, if you see an opportunity, that's how you contribute to this firm. And so I've taken that philosophy, that understanding with me throughout my entire career. Never be afraid to raise your hand and say, I have an idea.
That's gold, right? I mean, that's gold. That is really where the messaging is in terms of what you need to be doing more of. But it starts with being unafraid to do it, to take that step. Now, Gilda, can you talk a little bit more about how your clients grow or how you help your clients to grow and expand their footprint? Because you've been working with your clients for some time now. I mean, your roster is extraordinarily impressive, absolutely. But I think the most impressive thing about it is that you've been working with these clients for years. Your newest one is Jean-Claude Pierre, right? I mean, and yes, and she just joined, but a lot of the others have been with you for quite some time. So how do you continue to elevate the brand for your clients?
There is no cookie cutter.
Okay.
It really does depend on who that client is and what their goals are. Think about somebody like Courtney B. Vance, also an actor. When I first started working with him, Courtney's body of work, undeniably outstanding. When I first started working with him, he'd won a Tony. And he wasn't on a series at the time. He wasn't in a film, but it was this one kind of call it a crumb. There was one crumb that was happening at the time when we started working together. And he called me one day and he calls me Miss G. Miss G, I have a guest starring role on Scandal. Now we remember how big Scandal was.
Yes, absolutely.
One episode arc, but he said, it's called The Lawn Chair, and I think it's going to be really good. And it was dealing with, if I remember correctly, police brutality. I believe it was his son. This was back when, it was his son, and his son had been killed by the police. And he's a father trying to make sure that the world knew what happened to his kid. It was a really powerful episode. And as Courtney always does, he brought it. And at that point, I said, this is what we're going to do. And so because he was just a guest star on the episode, and ABC at that time, it was such a hot button topic that they weren't really sure how to deal with this. They weren't sure how this episode was going to be received. Mm-hmm. And so there wasn't a lot of, whereas Kerry Washington and Shonda Rhimes were heavy on social media for each episode. I don't know if you remember that. They were
I do.
Big time.
Yeah.
But this one, there was a decision to be sort of quiet around it, not out of disrespect for the topic, but out of respect for audiences to let them sort of absorb this episode and go from there. But I said to Courtney, and I remember saying this, I said, we're going to do a video with you, and we're going to put it on YouTube at the same time that the episode airs. And I want you, it's just a short video of you talking about what it meant to you as a father in real life to film this episode, as a father of a daughter and a son. And he said, okay. And so he did this short video. We launched the video on YouTube, and then I sent that video to radio and TV, and that's how we got the publicity around it.
Wow.
Okay. And so that was the beginning of Courtney and me once again starting to carve out what his space, because, Angela, his wife, Angela Bassett, his wife, she's in a whole other, she's an actor too, but he recognized like she's a global movie star.
Yeah.
He said, I'm more of an actor, just not a movie star or TV. I'm someone who, I just put in the work and I may not get a whole lot of recognition for it. Well, I wanted to change that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to change that. And so after that, fortunately, he got The People versus OJ as Johnnie Cochran.
Yeah.
And we
Which
really
was extraordinary.
Right. And it was the work that we did on the PR side with Courtney that really kind of bubbled up for FX, so that he was absolutely a big part of the cast promotion and publicity and marketing. And so because here's the thing, you can never forget about the work. The work you can do all the PR and marketing in the world, but if the presentation, reliability, credibility, and consistency aren't there, all of it's for naught. But if you have those key ingredients, right, that bubbles up to incredible opportunities. And so that show and the work that Courtney put in and the marketing and publicity around it really expanded Courtney's footprint in a huge way. And that was his first Emmy Award.
That's an incredible story. But I think the theme that is coming alive for me is that storytelling is so extraordinarily powerful, right? I mean, because that's what you did. You had him sit down and talk about himself as a father of two children, right? I mean, because let's be real, that can happen to any one of us. Wrong place, wrong time. But the idea that he could express himself as a true father, and what that would feel like, and then align it with the work that he was doing, I think made people relate more to him.
It's all about relatability. And that's the thing. Successful brands are accessible and relatable.
Yeah.
And when people feel like they can relate to you or to whatever it is that is the brand, that is really key. And storytelling is always a part of all of that. I wouldn't do my job on the PR side or the management side if it weren't for storytelling. Storytelling is the key, along with doing the work.
Yeah. It's the messaging also. I mean, one of my favorite brands is Nike, right? I mean, and I love their messaging because it's simple, it's clear, just do it, period. Right? Just do it. Stop thinking about it. Stop imagining about it and just do it. And that's been their brand forever.
I think about when you're talking about Nike, I think about when I made the decision. Again, I was still kind of feeling my way through the work. And I'm really proud of the work that Misty Copeland and I did, because that's been a cornerstone of my career. We decided in December 2024 that we would part ways on fine terms, but we felt like the work that we'd come together to do after 14 years was complete.
Wow. Yeah.
Think about when she was injured with those 6 stress fractures on her left tibia, where the doctors were all telling her, you're done, you're done dancing. At the time, I think Misty was 28 years old. And I saw her, I was there as she went through not just the physical rehab, but the emotional rehab. And just really thinking through, she wasn't done emotionally, mentally, spiritually. She was not done with dancing, but everybody was telling her, based on the circumstances, dancing is done with you. And so I thought about, okay, how do we take this moment to keep her pushing forward? Because think about it, we started working together in January 2011. These stress fractures, 2012 is when she danced that one Firebird at the Met Opera House, and then she had to pull out of the season. So we had only been working together for about just shy of a year and a half. So I felt like I described it to people as we were finally working our way to the edge and getting ready to fly. And then we were told, no, go sit down now. That's done.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought about, how do I keep her going while she's thinking this through, working through this? And so at the time, storytelling, she was working on her memoir with Sharice Jones, the writer, Life in Motion. And so she worked on that. We also had a children's book, Firebird, and she was working on with Christopher Myers, the illustrator. And so those things kept her going and motivated while she was doing the physical and mental rehab. That's what I called it. And so I thought about, as I watched her go through this process, I said, this is no different from what athletes do. This is no different. And so I wrote a letter. I sat down and I wrote an email, I think a very powerful, using storytelling email, about what I was witnessing Misty go through. And the ultimate goal, I said, I really would love for Under Armour to consider her an ambassador, because she is an athlete. And I know this is very different from anything you guys have ever done. She's not football, she's not basketball, she's not golf, but she is an athlete. And this is a unique opportunity. And I did not go to Nike on purpose, because I thought Under Armour will get this, because they're used to being and representing the underdog. And I said, so this is a really unique opportunity for you as a brand to represent, to do something different, to step out and do something very different, and to be on the road with this woman as she makes her way back to the stage. Crickets. I sent that, I want to say, in January of 2013. Crickets. Didn't hear anything. But out of the blue, I feel like it was in May of 2013. Out of the blue, I get a phone call, and, caller ID, it said Under Armour. And I thought, oh, how strange is this? I pick up the phone, and it was indeed a woman named Nicole from Under Armour who said, we're interested in your client, Misty Copeland. Now, here's the kicker. Here's the kicker, Denise. I said, oh my goodness, you got my email. And she said, what email?
Wow. Wow. That's interesting.
So
Yeah.
that beginning of the relationship with Under Armour. And it was that very first ad commercial, I Will What I Want, that kicked off their women's emotional effort. That was the first time that they were really stepping out into the women's space in a significant and impactful way.
Mm-hmm.
It spoke to women everywhere, and it really kicked it off. But it was the power of that storytelling that did it.
Yeah. Gilda, I just love the way you curate your approach for each individual client that you have. I love the way you're thoughtful about it and how you think about the pieces that you put together strategically. I mean, it's very, very effective. I mean, obviously it's gotten you to where you are today. Like that's wonderful.
I give that credit, believe it or not, to Goldman Sachs, because working at a global, established, prominent, preeminent brand like Goldman, you're constantly, you think that, and that's a mistake that a lot of people and companies make with their brands. They rest on their laurels. They start to think, oh, we're good here. We don't really have to invest in the brand. We don't have to really kind of take a second or third or fourth or 10th look at the brand. Mm-hmm. You can't ever assume that everything's okay.
Yeah.
You really do have to pay attention to the audiences that you're navigating and that you're engaging with. Even as a personal brand, you have to kind of pay attention. Like, I can't just assume that because I've worked with Angela Bassett and Courtney B. Vance and Wendell Pierce and Misty Copeland and Tina Lifford and Corinne Jean-Pierre that I'm automatically going to be able to, get a Jennifer Lopez. And if I got a Jennifer Lopez, I can just kind of take this model that I've worked with one other person and put it on Jennifer Lopez, right? Much respect to Penny Medina, her manager, who I also admire. You can't go into it like that, but just because I've done these things, just because I've accomplished these things, that this is just going to automatically keep going. The big mistake is also not understanding that your brand is never as important as you think it is. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Can you say it again?
Your brand is never as important as you think it is,
Okay.
to the point that you don't feel like you need to continue to make the investment
Right.
brand
Yeah. Because in other words, you're constantly working on it.
all the
You're
time.
constantly developing it, and you're always evolving, and you're always becoming, because you're never the same that you were a month ago, a year ago, or 5 years ago.
You're never done.
Right.
You're never finished. You're never complete. It's a constant, consistent evolution and investment in your brand. And that, I repeat, is a common mistake that people think, well, I'm this now, so I don't have to really focus on doing this or that. I can just be, and it's all going to still happen. And that's the biggest mistake I think that people make when it comes to brands.
And I would agree with you. I mean, because we're always growing. I mean, look at our forever First Lady, Michelle Obama. I mean, put out 2 books. Now she has a new podcast. I think, what is it called? In My Opinion, I believe, with her brother. And she's talking about, not just political things, but everyday things, being a mom, being the former First Lady, what it's like to be out there in the world today and in this geopolitical environment. I mean, I feel like she's always reinventing herself. So yes, she is our forever First Lady, but she's also standalone Michelle Obama.
Correct. And that's the thing, right? She carved out a space for herself apart from her husband.
Yes, she did. 100%.
That's exactly what we're talking about. And what was the key element that you just named? All through storytelling.
Yes. Yeah.
All.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I love this. Gilda, one of the things that I want to know is, have you seen personal branding trends shift over the years? And what's working now that wasn't as effective maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
So the shift that I have seen most prominently is the role that social media plays.
Okay.
Social media is huge. And with the various platforms, I remember when social media first sort of came into being. I was talking to an author named Lolita Files. She's a novelist, and she writes for film and TV now too. I remember her telling me, she said, "There's this thing called Twitter," and she said, "Gilda, it's like the next big thing." And I remember, well, what are you talking about, Lolita? And she said, "It is going to be game changing, revolutionary, because anyone will be able to tell their story in their own way via this platform called Twitter. And all it is a few words, it's little snapshots, but you will be able to grow your own audience." I still remember this conversation. You will be able to grow your own audience as a result, and you will be able to control the narrative. She said, it's a game changer. And I remember listening to her and thinking, okay, but now that I think, when I look back on that conversation, because it just so happened that at the time, Lolita had written a book about, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but she'd written a book about this ordinary man who was designed and created to become this huge rock star. He became like the biggest thing ever. And it was all smoke and mirrors. All of it. There was no talent there, nothing. And this is, believe it or not, this is pre-Kardashians. That's how funny this is, right? Yeah. And that's why we were having this conversation, because of her book. And she said, yeah, but there's this thing called Twitter. And so that's for me, I think that's the biggest shift, because social media plays such a huge factor in, even to the point of, like, if you are able to get on a talk show, the producer will look at, if you're not a known entity, the producer will look at your social media numbers and your social media engagement, not just the numbers, but are people engaging with your posts?
Right.
What are you posting, right? Yeah. When people are thinking about endorsement deals now, when companies are thinking about, well, do we want to take on this ambassador? This person as an ambassador, they look at your social media numbers and engagement. So social media, to Lolita Files' point, was a huge game changer. So I would say 5-10 years ago, I call PR the workhorse. Public relations was oftentimes the sole workhorse. When I was working in-house at HarperCollins and Penguin, it never ceased to amaze me with these authors and books. All the publishing, we'd sit around, I used to call it the firing squad. We'd sit in these big meetings and they say, okay, we're going to come together and we're going to talk about how to launch XYZ book. Okay, great. So we have editors, the marketing team, the sales team, the PR team, right? We're all sitting in this big conference room. Okay, so what do we think we're going to do? And I, again, call it the firing squad, and all eyes would turn on the publicist. Well, what are you going to do? And so it was my argument then, and it continues to be my argument today. You can't put everything into one basket. All of the tools in the shed need to work together. Depending on what it is you're pushing and promoting and putting out there, launching, whatever that is, that the tools in the shed, the percentages of what you use and to what extent you use may change and shift.
Right.
Bottom line is everything has to work together. So you can't launch something or promote something only in the media and think that that's going to do the trick.
You have to be able to connect the dots, right?
Time, because people are looking at different things at all times. You have some audiences that only pay attention to what a talk show is saying. You have some audiences that only pay attention to what TikTok is saying. You have some audiences who still read their newspapers online, if not in print. And so you have to use all of those tools. Advertising, particularly when I was at the book publisher, nobody wanted to advertise because nobody wants to spend money. Penny wise, pound foolish. Advertising still works.
Yeah.
And you know what? You don't have to spend $100,000 on an advertising campaign. The published number is just that, the published number. Send an email and ask for a meeting with that advertising rep. See what the packages are. Let them know what your budget is. Oftentimes, they're willing to work with your budget. So if you only have a budget of $5,000, believe me, that advertising rep will find a way to work with your $5,000.
Right.
An advertising package. So advertising is key. Marketing is key. PR is key. Social media is key. And also, depending on what you're doing, like I tell people who are looking to expand their footprint by speaking, look for what's happening locally in your town.
Yes.
So there are festivals, there are conferences of local chapters. There are opportunities to speak at, schools. All of those things matter.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting because, I was going to ask you about, what are some of the specific branding strategies that, women or underrepresented professionals, can use when they're looking at developing their brand. But I think you just answered that. I think it's really sitting down, though, and creating a personalized plan that represents what you believe in, represents your values, and represents how you want to show up. And then that's how you start to determine whether or not, you want to do speaking, whether or not you want to participate on panels or whatever it may be, go on to an interview on a podcast, or even just something in your own organization, heading up the Breast Cancer Awareness Month or whatever it may be. It really is about you being inspired, staying motivated, getting out there and doing things. It's about the execution components of it. Is it? Wouldn't you say that that's accurate?
Absolutely would. And let me just step back for 2 seconds. Podcasts. I will say that's the other game changer, Denise.
Yeah. Because
podcasts, much like social media, allow people to reach audiences that they may not reach. This is almost like, not everybody could get a radio show. Yeah. Not everybody could be a talk show host, but just about anybody can be a podcaster. Yeah. Now, whether you reach 1 million people or whether you reach 200 people, the bottom line is, think about it. And I say this to people all the time. When you think about so somebody will say, well, that only reaches 1,000 people. Right. But think about being in a room speaking before 1,000 people. That's significant.
Yes.
That's really significant. So that listening audience, you have to think about them in very much the same way.
Mhm.
1,000 people is like 1,000 people in a room who have come to see you and to hear
Right.
what you have to say. So podcasts, I would add, definitely a game changer.
And it's also the not just the people who have heard you, but the people who then want to talk about you, the people who have learned a tidbit or something that they've taken away and want to share it with others. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I do this here, on Promoted, is really because I feel that a lot of people don't have access to someone like a Gilda Squire or others that I have interviewed who are authors and leaders within their industries, and can talk about their experiences, tell their stories, and share what worked and also what didn't work. And the podcast just opens it up. I mean, it allows people to become listeners and learn something that perhaps they didn't know before, and share something that gets them to the very next level.
And guess what is key in helping podcasts grow? Social media, right?
Yes.
Because they take the snippets and they promote them on their social media channels.
Yeah.
Then their guests, if you are a podcast who has guests, then the guest talks about it on their social media. And so it's just this natural organic growth that you get that you might not have gotten 5 or 10 years ago before the explosion of podcasts.
Yeah.
To your question about what some of the strategies are that one can use. It is very much what I was saying about the personal plan is absolutely key. You have to understand the first step to developing a personal brand or any brand is understanding it. It's understanding it. And so once you understand what your brand is and where you want your brand to go, you think about starting right in your immediate area. I say this to people all the time who come to me, and one of the things that, and I'm going to be very honest with you, one of the things that turns me away is when clients come to me and say, I saw what you did for client so and so, and that's what I want you to do for me. Don't think about it like that. See, that tells me right there, you don't even understand your own brand, because you're coming into the arena saying, I want to be like that person. No, you want to be like you, whatever special you is.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're coming into it saying, I want that, or I want to be like that, that means that you still have a lot of self-reflection that you need to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so it does not, I repeat, because I have so many clients come to me, and if they don't feel like they got a national show, they feel like, oh, well, this didn't work. But it did. You had an opportunity. You have to build the portfolio in order to get to the big stage.
Yeah.
Building that portfolio oftentimes means you look around you and your community and your environment and seeing what those opportunities are. I'm working with Erica Woods, who's an actress, alongside Wendell Pierce in Raising Kanan on the Power.
Oh, yes.
And Erica is starting to build her profile, right? So one of the first things we did was, well, you and Wendell are a couple in real life, but you're also a couple on the show. And I think, I honestly believe, I'm just going to put it in the universe, and I've told them this, I really think they need their own spinoff because they're that good. But I told her, what we're going to do is, right before the show comes out, we're going to have you and Wendell go out there together and do media together to amplify what you're doing in the show. But at the same time as we're building your personal space and brand, right? We're going to go back to Kansas City, which is where you grew up, and you still have a home there. And we're going to get you a feature in the Kansas City Star, right? It's not the New York Times, but it is the Kansas City Star. We're going to get you on your local Great Day KC when you're back home in studio. It's not the Today Show, but it is a TV show, and you're going to get a clip. And so the more that you're able to show that this person, there is interest in this person, even if locally, that bubbles up to.
I just love this so much, Gilda. But one thing I was thinking about while you were talking was just that it may not necessarily be easy for somebody to do the things that you've been talking about for themselves. right? I mean, and it's not because they don't know themselves. I don't think it's because of that, but it's because of the ideas and the avenues and, just the opportunities that you may not necessarily know exist for yourself, and that you may not necessarily understand how effective it can be, right? I mean, just talking about the example you used, having the couple, Wendell and I'm sorry, her name is
Erica Woods.
Erica Woods, go back to Kansas. I mean, that's the beginning. But, I might have thought to myself, oh, I left Kansas. I'm in New York now, or I'm in LA now. But what you're saying is no, go back to where it started and begin building and cultivating from there. And that's, I think that's
in addition to.
Right, in addition to, but you have to, I guess my question here is, how do you know what to do if you don't have access to someone like a Gilda Squire? How can I begin to build it for myself? Yes, I know I should do some public speaking. I should network. I should, start in my home base. But what if I've done all of that? How do I know when to take it to the next level? And what does taking it to the next level look like?
I appreciate you saying that, because so often we as publicists feel like what we do is taken for granted. And it is.
Oh, no, it shouldn't be.
Lots of people, they do, Denise. Lots of people think that they can do what we do. And I've experienced that so much. So have many of my colleagues. And so I appreciate the fact that you highlighted that it really is a skill.
Oh, yes, indeed.
What I would recommend, there are publicists everywhere. And, not everyone, you have some publicists who are willing to take a chance. They may not charge their regular rate. If they feel like you have something very special to offer, they may not charge their regular rate. They may give you a serious discount. They may work with you on a deferred. I don't want to speak for other publicists, but I know that if it's something that I truly, truly believe that I could do an extraordinary job with, and I feel like this is something that really needs to be told and promoted and put out there, I have worked with people on that kind of basis. With Misty, I worked with her pro bono because I felt that strongly about initially. For the first 3 months, I offered to work with her pro bono because she's a performing artist, so she didn't really have the resources to pay a publicist. But I offered to work with her because I felt that strongly about what she had to say. Her story was that incredible that I felt like the world needed to know. So there are publicists everywhere. There are PR firms everywhere. Have an informational meeting. Set up an informational meeting and just say, hey, I see that you are a PR firm in my city or in my town. Look at who they represent, the work that they've done, and if they don't have it on their website or in their published bio, set up a brief meeting with them and say, look, I'm looking to potentially hire a PR firm because I have X, Y, and Z happening over the next few months. And I, have heard about you, or I was referred to you, or I found you online, and I'd love to hear what you think could be possible for me. Don't necessarily ask them for a proposal off the bat, but certainly just have a conversation and let them know what you're trying to do, what you want to do. And you can get a feel for if you think that person has something to offer, or if that company has something to offer you.
Thank you so much, Gilda. I really appreciate that. I mean, it's just the information that you've shared with the promoted community is just so invaluable. And as we begin to just wrap up, I have just two final questions, if I may. In your experience, what are the top 3 characteristics that you think make someone truly promotable, and how can professionals showcase these traits through their personal brand?
Wow. Okay.
I know that's a lot, but you can do it.
What are the 3 traits that make someone promotable? Are we talking about someone who is a professional Or are we talking about someone who's a public figure? Which are we talking about?
I think we're talking about someone who's a professional, not necessarily your everyday Eve, but somebody who's gotten to a certain level.
I think that their personal and professional journey, the storytelling of that is really, really important. Any milestones that they've experienced professionally as part of that storytelling, really important. What makes them stand out? What makes them promotable is also being an effective and strong communicator.
Yes.
You have done some extraordinary work, but somehow you don't know how to communicate and articulate what you've accomplished in a clear, to an extent, concise way, it doesn't work. And at that point, I would say engage a media trainer to help you come up with and refine the talking points for how you communicate what you've done. I think about, and I live, the power of example is important for me. I think about my client, Melanie Parker, who is the Googler engagement, a VP of Googler engagement at Google. She is an incredible person. She's had an incredible career. And one of the things that I've enjoyed about working with her through the lens of Google is her ability to really touch people. Because when you think about Google, you think about this massively large tech company, right? This multi-billion dollar tech company that seems inaccessible and just seems really out of our grasp, but we use it every day, right? But Melanie is I always say to them, she's one of their strongest and most effective ambassadors because she's able to talk about not just her journey, but also her mom's journey. Her mom, I believe, was the first Black woman to work at their local bank in High Point, North Carolina. She and her brother are the first in their family to be college educated and graduated. She went to an HBCU, Hampton University. And when she talks about this, she is the type of individual that you don't necessarily think about when you think Google. That's a brand thing, right? You only think about a certain type of person.
That's so true.
Google. And there's this woman, Black, accomplished, educated at an HBCU, sorority member, doesn't come from money, doesn't come from privilege, and yet she sits in the C-suite. And she's able to talk about it in a very relatable, compelling way. That's the example I would put for that.
I love that. I love that. So what I'm hearing you say is storytelling, effective, strong communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have worked with a select few people who have these great stories to tell, but initially did not know how to tell them.
It's an art though, right? I mean, it's not like just, it's more than just having I'm sorry?
It's the investment.
Yeah.
That's the investment. You can't assume that just because you've accomplished it, that's all you need to do. It's for that person, it's the constant investment of being able to work on telling their story in a compelling and impactful way.
Yeah.
Everybody's investment is different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's individual.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Gilda. And before we let you go, and I so appreciate your time and so grateful for you being here and having this conversation with myself and the promoted community. But are you reading anything that's interesting that you'd like to share with the promoted listeners?
I actually have two books that I'm reading. There are many books.
Okay.
Books right now. The Personal Librarian by Victoria Christopher Murray.
I read that. I love that book. Yeah, that's the J.P. Morgan book, right? Yeah, that's a great story.
And Missing White Woman by Kelly Garrett.
Wow. Awesome. Well, we'll include those in the show notes. Thank you so very much for sharing this information. I feel like I'm going to sit down right now and start creating my own personal brand or my own personal plan to continue cultivating my brand.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gilda. And I hope that you will be a friend of the Promoted community and come back and see us again.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you.
Well, that's all for today, everybody. Thank you so much to Gilda Squire for joining us. And we hope that you will come back and be a part of the Promoted community and listen to us again. Bye for now.